Happening now. We want to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good morning, good day, good evening. This is EdTech Situation Room, episode 237. That's a very large number here on November 3rd, 2021. My name is Jason Neiffer, and I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, which is Montana State Virtual School located on the beautiful University of Montana campus right here in lovely Missoula, Montana, in the western part of Big Sky Country. And joining me tonight, as always, good evening, Dr. Wesley Fryer. It's been 2 weeks. We're sorry that we weren't able to join you last week, but it's so great to see you tonight, sir.
Great to see you as well, Jason. I am coming from Oklahoma City, where it is cool and a bit rainy, and I am, for 7 more months, the Technology Integration and Innovation Specialist at the Cassidy School. And we had a really successful parent university last night, talking about online influencers and teen self-esteem. And today, I'm a little sad. There's some different things going on, but this is the last day of our trimester, and so I've got today, and I have sections 2 different days. So today and tomorrow are the end of the first trimester. So saying goodbye to these kids. And of course, I haven't told the kids that I'm job hunting and all that. So anyway, but it's good. And man, I have loved, just the scratch coding, the computational thinking. And then this year, I really need to write some blog posts, but the conspiracy theory moon landing stuff has been so good. So anyway, it's a little bittersweet. So it's happy, and you got a room full of kids like, no, we don't want it to end. We don't want to lose. Yeah, that makes you feel good. But
yeah, it does.
A little bit sad as well. Well, we're not just going to hear me, talk about the day at school. What the heck is this all about, Jason? Do we even remember after 2 weeks?
Yep, that's a really good question. We aren't getting any younger, Dr. Fryer. But the good news is that we've been doing it so long. It's at this point just process, right? So Wes and I collect links throughout the week of news articles in the tech journalism world, and we like to shoot them through a little educational prism, in part because we like to discuss these issues and hope you as a listener or viewer get some insight on educational technology in schools. And then secondarily, to understand that the larger tech environment does have a significant impact on schools. And that's certainly been true in the era of COVID, but also it's been very true for a good 20 years now in K-12 schools. And tonight, we're going to take a look at several topics: Apple news, Google news, Microsoft news. We'll cover a lot of tech bases there. We talk quite often about social media and software. And finally, our kind of pet topic, which has been really going now since about 2016 or so, is the notion of the tech correction, or things that are either happening now or will happen in order to change our relationship with technology. Dr. Fryer, is there any place you'd like to start tonight?
I think I'd like to start with a tech correction article, actually. And this is a fantastic one. Unfortunately, it is behind a paywall for the Wall Street Journal. So if you don't happen to subscribe, maybe you'll just have to go with our summary. But I put this one down under, actually, I think it's under social media. So, sometimes these can fit under multiple categories. Our categories, this, by the way, for tonight are Apple, social media, tech correction, Google, Microsoft, software, and Geeks of the Week. So under social media, we've got Wall Street Journal, October 29th, how to fix social media. So the tech correction is about this coming probably regulatory change that is going to happen because of so many different things that have taken place and continue to take place, and the consensus that there seems to be between both liberals and conservatives in the United States that something needs to be done. This article is fantastic, and I have honestly just read about half of it, but there are, I think, 10 authors. Amy Klobuchar, Clay Shirky, one of my absolute favorite authors, Nicholas Carr, who I'm not a huge fan of, but has a really, really good piece arguing that social media should be treated like broadcasting and talking historically about radio. Sherry Turkle, who's just a phenomenal thinker. Josh Hawley, who is a Missouri legislator who actually was, I think, somewhat positive about the January 6th events on the Capitol, but he argues about too much power in too few hands and presents that conservative side. Renee DiResta, one of the foremost researchers on disinformation and weaponization of social media, Jared Lanier, who's very prominent in the social dilemma documentary that came out last year, and others. I mean, it is incredible. So probably the best article that I have read to date on just the idea of regulating tech firms. And it I've heard people ask the question, is are the recent testimony of Frances Haugen, like the tobacco big moment for big tech, and perhaps not, but it really does seem like there's a lot of steam around the idea of having some kind of regulation. Hopefully, that's going to be some privacy legislation that is going to protect privacy. But I really, really commend this article, and like I said, it's a wide range of folks. Clay Shirky has the book "Here Comes Everybody," which I probably read in the mid to late 2000s, and I haven't read anything by him in a while. His pulled out quote from his section is that the faster content moves, the likelier it is to be born on the winds of emotional reaction. And so one of the things that he is promoting is this idea that scale and speed are, we're not wired for it as people. Anyway, I could go on, but that is just a fantastic article, and I think well worth your time to explore. And I don't know, what do you think, Jason? Is this the big tobacco moment for big tech, or obviously we haven't seen the legislation pass both houses of Congress to be signed by the president, but do you have any greater sense of what will be happening with tech regulation at this point?
I mean, the thing I keep thinking about, that every time someone drops big tobacco as your term, the big tobacco moment, the thing I keep remembering is that it took a long time for the United States to come to terms with big tobacco, right? That there was a clear sense as early as the 1950s that tobacco was a problematic product, right? And that there was a larger issue there. And one of the ways that it became complicated in the 80s and 90s, when governments were starting to sue tobacco manufacturers, that ultimately led to the tobacco settlements that in the huge state funds that were created, was that, how can you dare say that tobacco is the fault of tobacco companies, when it's been long known since the 1960s that tobacco was troublesome from a health standpoint. And that I don't think the regulation and accountability for big tobacco is necessarily a blueprint, but I think I do feel anxious sometimes, impatient maybe with the speed of which we seem to be having these conversations. But big tobacco, if you believe the assumption that social media is problematic for whatever reason, big tobacco is probably not a very good metaphor for this, in part because it's probably a lot bigger than big tobacco is, which means that we need to be patient with the processes as they play out. And I still don't really know what the answer to this is, but I do think that there is a lot of evidence to suggest that we may have to regulate ourselves first before government steps in and does it for us. And there's another example here I'll just mention as a piece of this. The Verge had a great article on October 25th called "Facebook's Lost Generation," and that is about the fact that kids won't touch Facebook with a 10-foot pole, and people under the age of 25 are just not Facebook people. And I have an example here. My niece, who is a college student in Arkansas, she is very active on Instagram, and I can keep up with her there. But if she wants to get to her grandmother's, so that includes my mom and my sister's mother-in-law, then to do that, she has to post to Facebook. And what's really funny about that, she posts to Facebook, she's on Facebook, but the people that are giving likes to that are old people. So her Uncle Jason and her Grandma Annie, my mom, are, that's where to get to some of those crowds, right? So the tools themselves may end up becoming less of a factor, and I know at least a dozen people that have left Facebook just in the last 2 weeks, and probably 200 people that have left Facebook in the last 2 years. And by me left, I mean like either deleted their account or put their account in hibernation. So maybe the Facebook part of this problem deals with itself, right? But the bottom line is that if we're expecting regulation to save us, it's probably not going to do it in time before these tools, if you believe they're doing damage, continue to do damage. And so I still think self-regulation, and then what I think you and I have been very consistently preaching for a very long time, we have to help kids understand these tools so that they make great decisions about them. And that's probably not unlike a public health response, right? Like part of getting kids not to start smoking is explaining to them early that tobacco is bad for them. I'm not saying that we want the same strategy, right? Because it's a little more nuanced about what the dangers of social media are, right? But education and treating it as a public health problem, probably not the worst strategy.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I did really like in the Nicholas Carr portion of this article was the references, and I'm not super knowledgeable about certainly the Radio Act of 1927, but also the Communications Act of 1934. And, this idea that, in the time, lawmakers, engineers, radio executives, representatives of the listening public, came together to define broadcasting as a privilege, not a right. And so then they, you know, said that there had to be the public interest in terms of licenses to broadcast. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should be all, licensed to blog, licensed to tweet, but, like I mentioned in the Clay Shirky article, as far as size and scale, I mean, there's many things that are unprecedented, but, the virality and the speed and the ability for individuals to be able to, to wield such power, and also for crowds too, as well. I've actually been listening, and I don't have these podcast links, but I've listened to some really excellent shows talking about, well, cancel culture, and talking about like the Dixie Chicks back in the day. And I mean, some of this is like the internet. I mean, the way the internet's evolved. And I think you're right. Regulating Facebook is not going to solve, quote unquote, all of these issues, but there certainly do seem to be behaviors specific to Facebook. I mean, the big thing is it's surveillance capitalism, right? It's data that's being sold and marketed, and the deal, and maybe it's kind of a deal with the devil that we have in terms of access to free tools that we're trading our stuff, we're trading our data, we're trading our privacy, and generally people seem to be pretty happy with that. So it's a very thought-provoking read. It is a bummer. I mean, I remember it wasn't that long ago, and part of what has happened is our school is now subscribing to, not only to the New York Times, but the Wall Street Journal, and then I'm paying for the Washington Post. So, through school and then myself, I'm paying more for journalism, which, by the way, is actually good in terms of like supporting journalists and high quality journalism. We've gotten used to, I don't know, the free access, but yeah, I think this is a great article, and I still wonder, in my future, how the intersection of all this will play out in terms of teaching. But it seems to be so important. I got to do a lecture at our high school a few weeks ago that I might have mentioned, because we have a group that's an integrated, I guess, for juniors, U.S. history, U.S. literature, and anyway, they're studying big tech, and got to talk about these issues a little bit with them. But it is something that is continuing to move forward. But, based on the glacial speed of change, or what can be glacial speed, with our Congress, it doesn't seem like we should be holding our breaths for imminent change. But I definitely think that privacy is important. We don't have a comprehensive privacy law here in the United States. It'll continue to be interesting to see what happens with states, because as we've talked about, I think California, and maybe I'm not going to say what the other state is, but I think there's someone besides Colorado, besides California, passing some privacy legislation. And then the question is like, well, is that sort of tide going to raise all boats, or so to speak? So if folks have to comply with things in California, is that going to mean that, hey, they're going to be, providing that same sort of privacy level protection for everybody? So, yes.
Yep. Great questions.
All right. Well, where to next? We won't go down a 30-minute rabbit hole with just one article. So where would you like
and
to
break
go
our
next?
streak, Wes?
Oh, no.
Well, let's see. Let's maybe take some of these other social media and tech correction news. Well, first, Facebook's broader company is known as Meta. I could not care less, right? It just doesn't seem like it fixes any of their problems, and it is for those of you that this was practically painted on the side of buildings, but Facebook announced that their larger company would rename to Meta, and Facebook being one tool of Meta. Kind of like how Google changed their name to Alphabet, and Google was one of the many companies that Alphabet owned. I don't think this fixes any problems. In fact, if anything, I think it looks a little silly in light of the bigger problems that Facebook is facing. That it looks like I'm not sure if callous is the right move, but maybe a somewhat limited response to the broader problems that Facebook may be facing. But I would imagine that there are other products which include some properties that are connected to Facebook, but not. As an example, Instagram. Instagram may or may not have the same problems as Facebook, but changing the name to something else or trying to dissociate with Facebook may or may not help those tools. So, any thoughts about Meta?
Yeah, I'll respond with another article that's under that same headline. Again, sorry folks, it's the Wall Street Journal, but it's Mark Zuckerberg sets Facebook on a long, costly path to metaverse reality. A few weeks ago, I had shared some wonder links with my kids that Facebook had put out about this like virtual reality Zoom video conference experience, and this idea of the metaverse. I don't, based on this article talking about what Facebook thinks they're going to spend and when they're pledging to spend, and then the number of years they're going to be spending on it. I mean, it's kind of a Ready Player One world that they're envisioning and wanting to spend to. I do think it might be a little tone deaf kind of at this moment. But I think what it signals is that, Facebook's a huge player. When you look at the graphs, and I just, I might include a link here in the Geek of the Week at the end for this, put together some graphs of, social media users. And, Facebook is a behemoth. But what you just said, Jason, about, younger users is absolutely true. Some of the Frances Haugen disclosures and articles that we've seen recently talk about how scared to death Facebook employees and leadership has been about losing the younger audience. TikTok, Instagram. And I think the world has shifted, at least for the current administration. Who knows what happens in 2024 and beyond. But like antitrust, in terms of like the acquisition of Instagram, there seems to be a lot of sentiment that was a bad thing. In fact, there's some in Congress proposing, trying to turn that clock back and make them divest and whatever. I mean, that would be pretty extreme. But Facebook has a ton of money. And so Zuckerberg here is pledging that essentially he's going to, and is right now, working to bring the Ready Player One virtual world. And maybe I'm not making an exactly perfect metaphor there, but we're talking about augmented reality, virtual reality, being able to live and work and shop and entertain and just do all kinds of things in very realistic, virtual spaces. So I do think this probably could be like a distraction technique as well, which is not going to work. But I see it as more just the commitment that Facebook has to things that are far larger and bigger than their current platform of Facebook. And it's wise of them to not just be stuck in the innovator's dilemma when they can't move beyond their existing product. I think that it doesn't look like at all they're going to get to pull off an Instagram for kids, which they were really, really pushing for. And it's an open question about how they're going to try and draw the younger audience. So yeah, it seems a little silly to have a name change, but hey, I was in San Francisco in 2007 when I heard Steve Jobs at the end of the iPhone announcement say, "Oh, and by the way, our name is Apple." And we're like, okay, that's not a small thing. And because Apple is far more than a computer company. Yes, they put computers in all kinds of things, but we've seen Google, switch with Alphabet. And what you also wonder is if it might be posturing for possible, I don't know if divestment's not the right word, because that's when you don't invest in things, but like when you get split apart, there are definite conversations that, Amy Klobuchar in that article I referenced and others, are really promoting to say these companies are too big and they need to be split up. So who knows, but I don't think it's going to change your life or mine, in the next couple weeks, but the continued emergence of virtual worlds and the compelling features of those and the ways in which we're going to be drawn into them kind of seems inexorable or inevitable, in terms of just the trajectory of technology. So don't count old Zuckerberg and Meta out. I think even with some regulation, it's just a huge war chest of money that they have to do things with. And it's going to be interesting.
Yep, absolutely. And then you want to talk about that article from the Financial Times about the loss due to iPhone privacy rules, or is that
Yeah,
new?
this was interesting. This is October 31st, not behind a paywall from Financial Times. Snapchat or Snap, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube lose nearly $10 billion after the iPhone privacy changes. We reported here shortly after it happened and people started to collect data about it, that when Apple changed this thing in the iOS to allow folks to say do not track, like over 70% of people said, yeah, that sounds good, don't track me. And so what this article is saying is that's yet a huge impact to the bottom line of these companies that rely on advertising and specifically targeted advertising. And so Sheryl Sandberg, who's the chief operating officer of Facebook, said, quote, these iPhone changes meant that the accuracy of our ad targeting decreased, which increased the cost of driving outcomes for advertisers, and then measuring those becomes more difficult. So again, if you want to look at a graph, I just put this link into the chat. Scroll down and look at the expected Q3 and Q4 2021 revenue of these companies, comparing Facebook, which is over 60 billion, to YouTube, which is somewhere around 16 or 17 billion, Twitter, which is not even 5. I want to say it's maybe 2, and Snapchat's 1. So it's just unbelievable how much money Facebook rakes in. And, I'm not losing any sleep or feeling sad at all for the companies. I'm not convinced that we've needed the kinds of targeted tracking and the level of data collection that we've seen social media companies and marketing companies, of course, want. And I think we talked maybe on a show at some point. I did some targeted advertising through Facebook a number of years ago, and it's probably been like 5 or 6 years ago. And it was shocking to see how specific I could drill down in geographic areas with demographics, with all of these different things. So again, we've said it before, I think Apple's stand for privacy is really good. It's really needed in the market. And what I wonder is if Tim Cook and the folks at Apple are seeing these statistics going, holy cow. I mean, did they know that they were going to have such a market impact? I think they're doing the right thing. And I'd love to see Android do that. But since they're a Google, property, I think it's far less likely that we're going to see Android do something similar as far as the do not track. But maybe there are third party apps to add to Android. I don't think Dr. Neiffer and I are Android users currently, so we'll have to
Not
ask
active
somebody else.
users.
Not active.
I have an iPhone, or I'm sorry, I have an Android phone that I would describe as a toy for me to play with, but that's about it. And the bottom line is that when you talk about the extraordinary largesse of finance in big tech, that is on the, largely the backs of consumer privacy. And, you know, eh, I've evolved in this a little bit. I used to be a little more comfortable with what Facebook and Google were doing with that, because I felt like they at least gave you some tools, whereas there were other privacy risk companies that were doing advertising that you never knew their name and never knew what they were doing, and were tracking you in ways that you couldn't go and track, whereas you can always find that information out on Facebook and Google. But I come around to that on a little bit, and I have to say, like, I know what the risk is and I know what the implication of that is, but I've turned that off on my phone. I've turned off the tracking on my phone, which I think is one of the beautiful luxuries of iPhones in 2021. I want to also pick up on something else you said, Wes, about the notion of targeted advertising. And I can tell you that I've advised some small businesses and also some nonprofits on targeted social media based advertising, online advertising. And I've myself used it for a couple of different projects, personal projects. I've also worked with some political candidates in doing that. And I have to say, the tools are infinitely less powerful than they were just 2 years ago. And that's largely due to politics. Whereas I could probably, with me and my relatively limited skill set, I could probably figure out more, but I'm not immersed in this area. I'd be willing to bet that the tool sets were powerful enough that if you wanted to target an individual, you have to spray the spray a little bigger than that, but you could probably hit someone if you really wanted to, if you knew a lot about that individual, and that's just not possible anymore. There's still a lot of interesting things you could do. Right now, you can get on Facebook and say, I would like to target teachers that live in Texas, that live in larger cities, that identify as male, that are also into the Houston Astros, right? And probably get a data set. You would know who they are, but you'd be able to target those individuals, and that's a little less than you used to be able to do.
Not as much. I mean, according to this article, like, you're part of what's happening is advertisers are having to spend more, because let's say you do want to target males, you can't. You're going to have to
Interesting.
spend twice as much, and if you want to reach 1,500, you're going to have to
Yeah.
try to reach 3,000, and that's kind of what that article's saying. Hey, we've got 3 live viewers, and I want to drop the link to our show notes in. Especially since we missed last week, have so many articles. There is no way we're going to be getting to all these. And if you see a particular article or topic that you'd really like to see us discuss, please let us know, and we can take that into consideration here as we move into our second half of the show. Do we want to pick up the under 18 removal? Did we talk about that one? Maybe not. I think that one carried forward from last time.
That's an interesting one. I think it's a smart one too. Google allows current minors, so people under the age of 18, to fill out a form, and there's a help page for it in this article from The Verge, and essentially you can remove any image of someone under the age of 18. And the only exception to this is compelling public interest or newsworthiness, which is actually, I think, a legal standard for that. But there's some caveats. Well, first, you have to be under the age of 18. You can't go and ask for, if there's a picture of you under the age of 18 and you're not 18. For example, I am not 18. And if there was a photo of me under the age of 18 I want to remove, you can't do that. That's not what is allowed there. And then I think it's just a good, sensible solution. I'm honestly surprised it took this long for Google to offer this. But I would, there are, and to be clear, it doesn't remove it from the web. It just removes it from the image search engine. And it's a good move.
Absolutely. Let's see. You want to shift a little bit to some Apple news? We've got
Sure.
quite a few Apple articles. Have you done the upgrade yet to
I
moderate?
did. I was just typing about that in chat to Peggy George, our chat moderator, and the so I own two Macs. I own at home. I own a Mac Mini M1, and at work I have a MacBook Pro, a 2020 MacBook Pro M1. And I did different strategies at work. I had not, or I had the M1 for almost 10 months now. And what I decided to do was just wipe and start over again with a fresh install, because all the junk I installed on there to test the M1 chip was still on there, and it's my primary work machine now. So I wanted to wipe and start over. So last weekend I wiped it, and there's a new process to do that. I would encourage you to use Apple Docs in case you are doing it the old-fashioned way with the USB drive. There's a new way to do that that's actually pretty efficient. So I wiped and started over again, and pretty solid. I did an in-place upgrade, so I installed over the old version on my home M1, and that's working pretty well so far too. I haven't noticed any issues, but I do want to note that there are some people that are experiencing issues. Tom's Hardware had an article on November 1st saying that some older Macs, these will be Intel Macs, they're not just not working in that something's wrong with them OS wise, they're bricked, which means they just don't work anymore. And this is 2009. This would be Intel Macs. And there doesn't seem to be any consistency to it. There's also in a couple of older ones that have also appeared on forums. But basically, what happens is that something's weird with the firmware that is both the charging and the battery based, and so the basically you can't charge the battery anymore, and eventually it just dies. So there's the Tom's Hardware notes there's no rhyme or reason to this. And that it's apparently iMacs and MacBook Pros and even Mac Mini devices are susceptible to the problem. And of course, if it's still in warranty, you should go to immediately to Apple. If you have a Genius Bar available to you, take it there first. It's going to get you faster service. I would also recommend, however, even if your a laptop is not covered under this anymore, but it was a supported laptop with the upgrade, Apple's probably going to take care of you, since it appears to be a software issue that is bricking, or the word I like to use is borking your piece there. So
Excellent. Let's see. What about this? We don't need the new MacBook Pro Lifehacker. What heresy is this you're putting into the show notes?
Wonderful article from Lifehacker. And it actually, the reason why I put this in here is because it kind of echoes what Wes and I were talking about 2 weeks ago in the release of the new MacBook Pros in 2021. But the bottom line is that if you are a regular power user, so you are a Wes or a Jason or a Peggy, the regular M1 Max released in 2020 are probably going to be good enough unless you are doing something that needs the graphical power. And so that's a lot of high-end video production or something that's super graphic intensive. But last year's M1 Max are so impressive, according to Lifehacker, that you really just don't need the new Mac. And they are substantially more expensive than their counterparts in 2020. And as I've mentioned a couple of times on the podcast, these are now available refurbished directly from Apple, and you could save sometimes upwards of $250 on a machine that will be supported like a brand new Mac. And get access to the M1 chip. And so, we mentioned this when we were reviewing the new Macs a couple weeks back, based on the announcements. But there's a lot of wonderful features on those Macs. And sure, if money was not a factor, sure, I probably would buy myself a 14-inch or 16-inch 2021 MacBook Pro. But if you're just doing this for daily use, the MacBook Air is probably good enough to do a lot of tasks even very aggressive power users would need to do.
Absolutely. All right. And hey, this article about Google Drive has got to make you happy, you Google Drive loving man.
It does. Finally, there is a native M1 Google Drive desktop app for the Mac M1s. And up until this point, the Google Drive desktop app required some finicking to make it work.
We're
And
using extremely technical terms tonight.
yes, you had to fiddle with it to get it to work correctly, and it worked. But for those of you like me that are using Apple hardware but very deep in the Google world, it's a wonderful update.
Do you back up your entire computer, by the way, to Google? It's weird because I'm not using backup and sync, and I think this is what created it. But when I log into my personal Google Drive, over on the side, I've got my drive, shared drives, and then computers. And I'm not backing them up. Do you still see that, or did you ever have
I
that?
do, but I actually use the Google Drive for Desktop app as opposed to the Google Backup and Sync. And the way
Yeah.
I do that, and this is going to get down a rabbit hole, but let me see if I can make this 30 seconds or less. Google Drive for Desktop is only available for non-personal accounts, and I love that because it doesn't store your whole drive on your desktop; it just streams it to you.
And that's like Google Drive File Stream was back in the day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And that's their new version of that. And again, not available for personal accounts. But what I do instead is that I have I have some projects and small businesses that have Google services purchased for those domains. So I just have a master account that I call the Knife Drive, right? It's literally called #Knife Drive, right? That I share with my work account and then the small business accounts that has 99% of my stuff I would need to access on any computer on it. And so I just use that to help stream that to my desktop. And it's worth the $6 I pay a month for that account.
Okay, so this is worth going down a bit of a rabbit hole as far as talking about the educational impact. I had to power wash my school Chromebook this week, and it appeared to be because I had checked or left checked the offline data access, so that all of my Google Drive was downloading. I guess if you're doing this for offline access for everything. Anyway, because it I don't know. It said it was system, and it's just I think it's like a 35 gig hard drive for the Chromebook. Does that sound like a really small one? Anyway, this topic is worth sharing with teachers and not assuming that people will just figure out. This has changed considerably, even the names of the applications that are used to do this. I think in general, most of our teachers will just use the Chrome browser, even though they're on a MacBook laptop, an M1 MacBook laptop. And I tend to do that at certain times of my life. I have used these applications, but for teachers or educators, anybody who really like the quote Finder level file manager style, management of files rather than doing all this in the browser. The application that Jason's talking about is, outstanding. That used to be called Google Drive File Stream, and now it's called the Google Drive Desktop Mac, right? Is somebody saying that right? So in
Yes.
addition to that, we have Backup and Sync, which is a backup program, but that is different. So the bottom line is we want people to save stuff to the cloud and to put things into Google Drive. And I do recommend to our teachers they at least consider an iCloud account and boosting that up, because then everything that's in their documents and on their desktop ends up, if they check the box, being backed up to iCloud Drive. So I've been doing that for a while. So yes, we can get into the weeds with all this. The bottom line is, and Peggy mentioned, the idea of wiping and reinstalling is kind of scary. Wipe and install. That is the safest way to do an install, and it's not only the safest way as far as being sure that your machine is you know malware free. It's also it's also the best way, just in terms of working in different places, and you never know what can happen to your machine. And I think living a life that is redundantly backed up and saved on the cloud. So anyway, those are definitely worth things understanding at a personal level, but they're also worth, if you have an opportunity, taking time to explain to teachers as well.
Yep,
And Peggy's
absolutely.
right. Yeah, the app that Jason's talking about is not for personal use. Backup and sync is available for personal use, but you have to be using an enterprise account with Google to use what is now called Google Drive Desktop, which used to be called Google Drive File Stream. But
Yep.
the killer feature is it doesn't download at all. It just indexes it and still lets you organize the files, but it downloads them on an as needed basis. So it's really good.
And then once you cover that Apple support article about iMovie.
Okay, so I published a new barbecue video this weekend, cooked a brisket, and happened to notice when I was in iMovie, hey, there's this, note saying don't put your stuff up in iMovie Theater, which, I don't know how many people have done that, but over the years, I think I probably have about 8 or so different videos. So iMovie does not support the iMovie Theater publishing option, and the app, which used to be available on Apple TV called iMovie Theater, is not available either. So what you have to do is basically just tap a button, send it to your iCloud photos. And if you're not using iCloud Photos, you want to enable that, or you could probably save it locally and do something else with it. But on the topic of backing stuff up, my practice is I have iCloud Photos on. All of my photos back up automatically there. I also redundantly, have my Google Photos backing up. I think I have to have the app open. So anyway, that doesn't happen as quickly. But if you've got stuff in iMovie Theater, you need to get that moved over. And I'll tell the sad story that when, was it called iWeb, got finally taken down. Was that in like 2002 or I don't know what that was. But anyway, I had some content there that I didn't move off, and I think some of those things actually are still on my old Mac G3 Yosemite tower that's over in the sunroom that my wife would love for me probably to throw away. But it is not a good thing to lose important photos, especially of your family or movies or anything like that. So back up your stuff, kids. You gotta back it up.
Yep.
One way or
I will
another.
I will also know, just while we're on the themes of backups for just 1 second, I just store everything in Google Drive, period. And if I want it to remain in my life, I put it on Google Drive, period, end of story. So that's the way I have to deal with that. Otherwise, and in part because I use different machines all the time. So
Didn't Google announce something though that they were going to start if like a file was really big and you hadn't done anything with it for a while? Is there any kind of deletion or anything like that that's happening for Google Drive's
I
stored
think
stuff?
it was that they were storing things. I remember something about this. I don't think it was
Mm,
quite there. We'll have to look into that. That's a good question.
yeah. Peggy is really wise. She's saying she's over backing up and probably having 3 copies of all her photos, but it's smart.
Actually,
I
I did
I
too.
I do marvel at, and this we'll just gush Apple here. I will for just a moment, but they really do figure out some things that are hugely beneficial. But sometimes I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm slow to embrace them. One of them was iCloud Drive, and it took my son pulling up a file, on his phone that had been on his desktop. I was like, "How'd you do that? Oh my gosh, that's so amazing!" And then the photos and being able to have all that backed up. I've myself done the arduous, backup with the iPhoto library, and I've helped our teachers do that before. And so it's just really, yes, you have to subscribe and pay a little bit, and we do for a little bit more storage, but it is so worth it, and definitely makes the process of transitioning to another iPhone or another device exceptionally easy. So yay, Apple. But back up your stuff one way or the other. And if Google Drive meets your needs, then awesome. That's
Yep.
fantastic.
Okay, let's talk some Google stuff because I want to cover a couple interesting things that are going on here. First, there's a really interesting feature in the newest version of Android 12, that allows you to do more to separate your work and personal life. This is from The Verge on October 21st. And this is such a clever strategy that I think that Apple should copy this, and I'm sure they will, since that's what happens with both these platforms is copying back and forth. But essentially, there's a feature called Google Work Profile. It's a tool for Android, which allows you to hide work apps and data with the flip of a switch, and I think it's the pull down lampshade menu. And according to the company itself, that it was initially or it is initially available only on managed phones, and so that's an Android phone that your institution or company or business issues to you, and it allows you essentially to create kind of a barrier between work and personal life. And so if you're carrying the one phone with you and it happens to be a work phone, but you do personal stuff on there, it allows you to separate that out. But Google said it's going to come to anyone using Google Workspace in 2022, which means that if you have a work account on Google Workspace and you want to do that flip switch, then that's great. That it will be available to you even if you don't have a managed phone. And apparently, they're also working on some ways to essentially hide the data from each other's apps. So if you work data and personal data will be segregated. And I've been talking about this for literally years. The first time I did a digital distraction presentation, this has to be 4 or 5 years ago when I first started talking about this at conferences and in teacher presentations. And my advice always has been that it's perfectly okay to delete your work count off of your phone, especially if it's not a work issued phone, as a means of creating a dividing line between your work life and your personal life. But it's really cool, this notion of being able to, in essence, flip a switch on the phone and turn off your work stuff or turn off your personal stuff for that matter if you want to be in work mode. And I love this. I think it's such a clever strategy. I mean, there are times when in high anxiety times at work, when I am tempted to get on my email over a weekend, when I really need to separate myself from my own mental health, and also because I need a break to be more effective at work, I've actually deleted the work account off my phone over the weekend to not tempt myself to do that. I also strongly advise that, especially for teachers that have a problem drawing that line, just don't put your school stuff on your phone, right? Make your phone a personal device as a means of trying to draw that line if you can't draw it for yourself. And I love this functionality. I think it's really smart, and I think it's a very savvy move on the part of Google. You're on mute, Dr. Fryer.
I'd like to tell some stories, but I'm going to ask you to recognize my miming mouth and hand gestures. Thank you. So I have several thoughts about this. Number one, I have a friend and former colleague who shifted over to the military, and now his email's classified security, and he absolutely can't have it on his personal device, and he can't do it outside of the office. And like, I just was visiting with him about that, about what an incredible gift it is and how he never imagined that kind of freedom. And so I find that really interesting, but also probably instructive for us to think about. I know for my wife, like, keeping up on her work email via her phone when she's out at recess or all kinds of time when she's riding in the car, is just, she's doing it all the time. So I think that's wellness and thinking about work-life balance is hugely important. But for leaders out there who are perhaps the ones sending email out to employees and faculty and staff, or formulating policies, universities, I know when I was at Texas Tech years ago, they had a really great service. They called it Tech Announce. But for the kinds of announcements and broadcast stuff, it wouldn't just come to you as an email. You could opt in to receive the digest version. If you wanted to get them as they came out, you could, but good grief, who wants that? Anyway, that's a whole university, and that's a bigger scale probably than a lot of our listeners who I'm thinking are probably with K-12 schools. But information overload is real. Communications departments are certainly is trying to maintain really close awareness of parent, overload and not wanting to send too much content. But, who's looking out for the teachers? And, I know when I stopped being tech director, we have 4 different divisions, and we had 4 different lists, one for each one, plus the school list, and I was subscribed to all of them. My gosh, it could be just very overwhelming some days, just the quantity of messages that were sent to those lists. So anyway, it's something to think about. That's a good topic to engage, not only from a management standpoint. I just taught my fifth graders how to set up their email filters and, filter Google notifications and Gmail into a separate box. I mean, I had kids almost hugging me, literally. They were so joyful, some with like 300 and 400 emails, and just moving those, got them below 100. So that level is important in terms of management, but thinking about what we send out, there's a whole lot around that conversation. So glad to see Google doing that. Maybe we'll see Apple do that. The last quick thing is focus zones. Is that what they're called? Have you played with those yet, Jason, on the iPhone with iOS 15?
No, and the reason why is because I want to wait for the functionality to bake a little more because of health notifications. Since I track blood sugar with my phone and my watch for that matter, and I got a lot of warning messages when I updated iOS 15 that I want to know more about it before I do that so I don't lose critical health notifications.
Yeah, right. Well, I think you can pretty much let whatever pass through you want, but the idea there is that, your phone, and I'm going to have this, maybe I'll do this over the holiday break. Your phone, for instance, can use GPS and automatically know, hey, I'm, not at school anymore, and it can change the notifications that get pushed through when you're not, either physically on campus or a time, during the weekday or whatever. And it's sort of like the do not disturb on steroids, and you can do a lot of customization with it. So I have not played with it either, but it certainly is one of the features of iOS 15 that I think has really good implications for us on a wellness perspective. And again, thinking about boundaries and thinking about, our own accessibility. I talked with a teacher, by the way, who had just asked kids to all email her their assignments for all of her sections. And oh my gosh, that is just not a great recipe for mental health if you're having kids directly email you all their assignments, even if it's just for one or two things.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, what else from Google?
Well, I want to point out one other thing, and then, well, there's a lot of deeper topics. I might punt a couple of these to
Well,
next week.
let me do the
But
focus. Let me do the focus time real quick,
okay,
because that
great.
actually
That's
ties to
awesome.
what we were just doing. So, okay, this doesn't necessarily change your behavior, but it's really cool. Google now has a feature for Google Calendar called Focus Time. And if you have a goal, like I need to be writing more, you can set that goal in Google Calendar, and then it will find a time. You tell it how often you want to do it, and it will find a time on your calendar to book it and set that up and remind you about it. Now, I've had that going for about a week or so, and it really hasn't, I haven't sat down and written at that specific time yet. Or I mean, I think I did it once, but anyway, it's tying into this idea of managing tasks, managing priorities, and also using some, intelligent algorithms to look at your calendar and available time, assuming you've got the bulk of your stuff that you're doing in your life on your calendar, and then it's going to find time for you to do those things and remind you. So Peggy's reminding us of the app Track My Subs, which is one that she's using, I think, for subscriptions and trying to get a hold of those. So good geek of the week there.
Well, let me cover one last article, and then I want to have a deeper conversation maybe next time about Chromebooks because there's been a lot of hand wringing the last 2 weeks because of the decrease in sales of Chromebooks. But there is an article from 9 to 5 Google on October 26th that says there is finally an Adobe Photoshop and an Adobe Illustrator available now on the web, which works just fine on Chromebooks. And I've only played with it for maybe a sum total of 90 seconds. And I do know from the articles, I am not an Adobe Power user, so I myself am not the person to put these through its paces, right? In fact, other than when I occasionally do some work in Illustrator, when I'm working in a vector image, like a logo, for example, I will sometimes use some of the advanced stuff. But so far from reviews I've read about this is that it works pretty darn well on Chromebooks. And if you're trying to be a Chrome OS only guy, like I have been off and on over the last 3 or 4 years, it's going to meet your general photo editing needs. It is not an app. It is a web-based property. but I actually think that's a very good thing because it's likely to work a lot better than it would otherwise.
That's amazing. We have a license, I think, for 500 Adobe Creative Cloud users, and in practicality, it's anybody on our faculty staff that want to use that, and then high schoolers. But we've got some middle schoolers doing art and tech, and that was one of the conversations about Chromebooks. We're like, well, what about Adobe? What about what kids are going to be able to use? So the idea of being able to use that in the browser, I think, is wonderful. We have used for a while. Let me see if I can get it. And this, I have a web page of student authors at our school, and I can drop this link in. Different web-based image editing tools. Pixlr is the one that we have used the most. There's also Pixlr X. And then there's really powerful tools for removing backgrounds and making transparent PNGs. So anyway, yeah, web-based. The maturity of the web, the power of HTML5 and web standards. Amazing. So that'll be interesting. It says, I think, in the article that that's still limited to Creative Cloud license holders. So you're going to need to have a license, I guess, for regular Photoshop to be able to use it on the web. At least that's what it looks like to me. So I may actually check that out. I haven't used Photoshop for a long time because there are a lot of other tools that can get me by, but that will be an exciting thing for the designers and Photoshop lovers among us.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Wes, we're just a couple minutes before the top of the hour. Please share your Geek of the Week.
All right, so I got two quick ones. The first one is a link to our slides for last night's Parent University. We actually had 76 parents register, which is unbelievable, and we had about half of those, show up. But this is a presentation that I did along with our student support team, our student support services, counselors, and influencers are ginormous. It's incredible the power they wield and the ways in which, many companies for marketing and advertising purposes have pivoted to really focus on social media influencers, not only on YouTube, but definitely and more so on TikTok, Instagram, really all of the platforms. So you can go ahead and check out those slides. And then the other one that I have is just kind of a motivational video that my wife found. We've had a SpaceX mission. I think this is the third manned mission, or I'm not saying that correctly, but the third one with folks on it, with astronauts on it. And it was supposed to go like Halloween night, and it's been delayed twice. But this is the introductory video with Kayla Barron, who's I think she's a Naval Academy graduate, and then she was one of the first females to be aboard submarines, and now she's an astronaut, and she's commanding this mission. It is so inspiring, and I would just say never underestimate the power of sharing inspiring digital stories with students and with anybody. So check it out. How about you, Dr. Neiffer?
I'm sharing something that I just am starting this week. I heard about this from some teachers in the local school district in the town I live in, and I did a little research, and I like what they had to say. The organization is called Mindful Schools, and it is I think it's a nonprofit, but part of what they do is support teachers and administrators to create schools that cultivate mindfulness. And for those of you that have discovered the power of things like meditation, being present, living in the now, and its wonderful benefits for mental health, which I have done. I am a fairly regular meditator. This is the school version of how that works. And so they do offer a lot of pretty interesting free materials, including some research available on the importance of helping students become more mindful. But I've started taking. They have 3 courses available: mindfulness foundations, mindfulness in the classroom, and then I believe they also have a school implementation clinical course you can take too. The courses do cost money. These are it is a pay for service, but I've started the first class this week, which I'm paying for myself in order to really, I think, both up my game personally with mindfulness, and then secondarily, I think there's something here in regards to my program, which delivers distance learning to students.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we've done it. It's 59 minutes and 10 seconds, so almost on the nose.
Well, Wes, where can people find you then if they want to connect with you after the show is over with?
Find me on Twitter at wfryer or just visit wesfryer.com. I've actually put a teaching portfolio up. I'm continuing to apply for some different assistant professor and other K-12 positions in various and sundry states around, so far just the United States. But anyway, you can check all that out at wesfryer.com. How about you, Dr. Neiffer?
Best place to find me is also Twitter, Tech Savvy Teach. I like to post some of the articles actually that I post or I talk about in EdTech Situation Room. I'll post there first, and I like to engage with people like Dr. Fryer on educational technology issues of the day. But this here is not Twitter; it's the EdTech Situation Room podcast. We are a once a week podcast that broadcasts on Wednesday evenings at 8 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 p.m. Central Time is where Dr. Fryer is located, and somewhere in the middle of the night if you want to catch us in Europe, although that will change by an hour this coming Sunday with daylight savings time. We'd love it if you could join us live. We love to have live viewers. You can hang out with Peggy, our chat moderator, in the YouTube chat room. We're also live via Facebook as well. No word on whether or not Facebook will continue to host us now that they're known as Meta. But if you can't catch us live, you can always go to where finer podcasts are aggregated. I've yet to see an app that doesn't feature the EdTech Situation Room. You can download tiny MP3s from our website, edtechsr.com. You can also find us on Twitter at edtechsr. We hope you have a great week. Stay safe, stay savvy, and we'll see you next time on the EdTech Situation Room. Have a great night.
Good night, everybody.